The grand hall of the HFY Empire was filled with the laughter of warlords, generals, and high-ranking officials from across the galaxy. They stood tall, their reptilian forms covered in shimmering battle armor, their sharp teeth flashing as they mocked the small delegation of humans standing before them. The chamber was a symbol of power, a place where empires were shaped and civilizations were either welcomed into the fold or crushed under the might of the HFY war machine. A HFY warlord, his crimson eyes gleaming with arrogance, stepped forward, his heavy boots echoing in the massive hall. "So these are the so-called humans," he sneered, his voice laced with condescension. "I expected more, but all I see are weak, fragile creatures with no real fleet, no significant technology, and no history of conquest. Tell me, humans, do you even know what war is?" The laughter around the room grew louder, a deep, rumbling chorus of superiority. The human delegation, led by a composed man named Ambassador Clark, remained silent. They stood firm but did not react to the insults, nor did they show the slightest hint of anger. Their calmness only amused the warlords further. Another alien, a towering insectoid species known as the Vraxil, clicked its mandibles in amusement. Perhaps they have finally accepted their place. It is good when lesser species know when to bow before true power. Ambassador Clark finally spoke, his voice calm, measured, and devoid of emotion. "We understand that the HFY Empire sees itself as the dominant force in the galaxy. We understand that you believe humanity to be weak, insignificant, and incapable of defending itself." He paused, his eyes scanning the assembly of warlords. But assumptions can be dangerous. The room fell silent for a brief moment before another wave of laughter erupted. The HFY Emperor himself, a massive being covered in ornate golden armor, leaned forward from his throne, his deep voice shaking the very walls. "Dangerous? To whom? Your species has no fleet worth mentioning. Your homeworld is barely defended. Even now, we could take Earth without resistance, and yet you dare speak of danger." Ambassador Clark did not flinch. His face remained neutral, betraying no fear, no anger, just patience. "Then why haven't you?" he asked. The warlords exchanged glances. Some growled in irritation. It was true that humanity had not been conquered yet, but only because the HFY Empire had not deemed them worthy of immediate attention. Earth was a curiosity, nothing more. A species with potential, but still primitive by galactic standards. A HFY general stepped forward, his voice filled with amusement. "Because it is not worth the effort to send a fleet to deal with a species that has no means of defending itself. You do not even possess warp-capable battleships. We see no challenge in taking what we want. Your people will serve, and your world will be another resource for the Empire. That is your future." Ambassador Clark glanced at his colleagues. The human delegation remained expressionless, unreadable. "Perhaps," Clark said slowly, "but perhaps you are mistaken." A murmur spread through the assembly, confusion evident among the warlords. Mistaken? The very idea was absurd. The HFY had conquered hundreds of worlds, crushed countless civilizations, and fought wars against species far superior to the humans. The thought that they could be wrong about humanity was laughable. The Emperor chuckled, shaking his massive head. "Mistaken? No, human. We are never mistaken. You are already defeated. You just don't know it yet." Ambassador Clark simply smiled. "We shall see." With that, he gave a slight nod to his team, and the human delegation turned and walked away, their exit silent but deliberate. The HFY warlords watched them go, shaking their heads, some even muttering about how pathetic the humans were. As the heavy doors of the Grand Hall closed behind them, Clark's expression remained neutral, but his mind was focused. The HFY thought humanity was defenseless, unprepared, and weak. They had no idea what was coming. Far beyond the reach of the HFY Empire's sensors, hidden in the depths of space, an impossible fleet lay dormant, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. And when it did, the galaxy would never be the same. The Exilari Empire continued to mock humanity, believing them to be a species without strength, without the power to resist. The warlords laughed, their arrogance blinding them to the truth. But beyond their knowledge, in the cold darkness of space, something was stirring, something the galaxy was not prepared for. Ambassador Clark and his team had returned to their ship, a diplomatic vessel that the Exilari barely even considered worth tracking. It was a small, sleek craft, designed for long-range travel rather than battle. The warlords did not care where the humans went. They had already dismissed them as weaklings. That was their first mistake. Inside the ship, Clark sat in the command chair, his fingers tapping lightly against the console as he watched the stars stretch before them. The rest of his team remained quiet, knowing what was about to happen next. "Is the message ready?" Clark asked. A young officer, Lieutenant Carter, nodded. "Encoded and waiting for your authorization, sir." Clark exhaled slowly. "Send it." Carter pressed a single button, and across the vast expanse of space, a silent signal was transmitted. It was not sent on any normal frequency, not through standard galactic communication channels. Instead, it traveled along a hidden network, encrypted with codes only a select few could understand. The message was brief, but its meaning was clear. "Initiate Phase 1. The fleet is ready." Far from Silari-controlled space, in a region long believed to be uninhabited, reality itself seemed to ripple. The fabric of space trembled as massive distortions formed, hidden rifts in the void, invisible to the untrained eye. And then, one by one, they appeared. Colossal warships, their dark hulls absorbing the light of distant stars, emerged from the nothingness. There was no fanfare, no grand display, only silent, efficient movement. Thousands of ships, lined in perfect formation, awaited their command. On the bridge of the largest vessel, a titan of war known as the Nemesis, Fleet Admiral Richard Vaughn stood with his arms crossed, his sharp eyes scanning the endless formations of ships. His fleet had been waiting for this moment, hidden from the galaxy for years, developing technology that Silari could not even begin to comprehend. Now, the time had come to reveal the truth. A holographic display flickered to life before him, showing Ambassador Clark. "Message received," Vaughn said. His voice was steady, controlled. "We are in position, awaiting final confirmation." Clark's face remained calm. "Proceed as planned. Let them think we are weak. Let them believe they have already won." Vaughn gave a sharp nod. "Understood." He turned toward his officers. "Initiate cloak sequence. Begin silent approach. We move in the shadows until the time is right." One by one, the massive warships disappeared from view, their advanced cloaking systems rendering them undetectable. The galaxy still believed humanity was defenseless, fragile, and powerless. That illusion would not last much longer. Back on Silari Prime, the warlords feasted, celebrating their inevitable victory over humanity. They had no idea that death was already approaching, hidden in the void, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The Exilari warlords remained blissfully unaware of what was coming. To them, humanity was already defeated, their so-called diplomatic retreat proof of their weakness. They continued their celebrations, drinking exotic wines and boasting about their inevitable conquest of Earth. But in the depths of space, hidden from their sensors, the storm was already gathering. Ambassador Clark sat in his private chamber aboard the diplomatic ship, staring at the holographic projection before him. It displayed a live tactical overview of the fleet. Thousands of warships lying in wait, their cloaking systems active, their weapons primed. The sheer scale of the force was terrifying, even to him. He had been one of the few who knew the truth. Humanity had never been weak. For years, the United Earth Command had been preparing for this moment. While the rest of the galaxy mocked humanity, they had been advancing in secret. Deep space stations, hidden research facilities, and classified military projects had all led to the creation of this fleet. The auxiliary thought humans were helpless, but they had no idea what kind of weapons had been forged in the silence of the void. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. The ship's AI spoke in its usual calm tone. Incoming transmission. Secure military channel. Clark straightened. Patch it through. A new hologram appeared. Admiral Vaughn. His expression sharp as ever. Ambassador, the fleet is in final position. We are within striking range of the Silari core worlds. All ships report readiness. Clark nodded. Any sign they suspect? None, Vaughn replied. They still believe we're running. Their patrols remain lax, and their long-range sensors are laughable against our stealth tech. We could be in their orbit, and they wouldn't know until it was too late. Clark exhaled, nodding slowly. Good, but we must strike at the right moment. Not yet. Let them sink further into their arrogance. Let them believe we have surrendered completely. Vaughn's lips curled into a smirk. Understood. We remain on standby. But when the order comes, Ambassador, it will be swift. The transmission ended, and Clark leaned back in his chair. The plan was in motion. The fleet was hidden, unseen. All they had to do now was wait for the Exilari to make their final mistake. On Silari Prime, High Warlord Jekthar lounged in his throne-like seat, surrounded by his generals. The feast hall was alive with music and laughter, the air thick with the scent of roasted meat and strong drink. Exilari commander approached, bowing respectfully. High Warlord, the latest intelligence report from the human sector has arrived. Jekthar waved a clawed hand lazily. Let me guess. More whining. More pathetic cries for mercy. The commander hesitated. They appear to be withdrawing their remaining ships. Fewer human vessels have been detected in the outer colonies. Their activity has decreased significantly. Jekthar barked a laugh. Of course, they know resistance is useless. Humanity is finally learning its place. Another general chuckled. It's amusing, really. I almost wish they had fought harder. A real challenge would have been entertaining. Jekthar grinned, lifting his goblet. Then let us toast to the death of humanity's pride. The hall erupted in cheers, but outside, beyond their world, the invisible fleet of warships remained motionless, waiting for the signal. The Exilari had just sealed their fate. The Exilari warlords celebrated their supposed victory, oblivious to the silent death lurking beyond their borders. Humanity's fleet, cloaked and waiting, remained in perfect formation, unseen by the enemy's primitive sensors. Every human warship, from the smallest corvette to the massive dreadnoughts, stood ready to strike. The Exilari thought humanity had surrendered, but in reality they had only stepped back to deliver a killing blow. Deep within the command bridge of the UES Retribution, Admiral Vaughn stood in silence, his gaze fixed on the massive display before him. Holographic projections of the Exilari's core worlds shimmered in the dim blue glow of the tactical table. His officers waited for his command, hands poised over controls that could unleash devastation upon an entire civilization. All ships report ready, sir, a communications officer announced, her voice steady. Cloaking systems stable. Targets acquired. Vaughn nodded. And the Exilari? Completely unaware, another officer replied. They haven't increased their patrols, and their fleets remain scattered. They truly believe we've given up. A small smirk crossed Vaughn's lips. The fools had no idea what was coming. A chime sounded, signaling an incoming transmission. The image of Ambassador Clark flickered into view. His face was calm, but his eyes carried the weight of what was about to happen. Admiral, Clark began, his voice measured, the High Warlord has officially declared total dominion over human territories. The Exilari Senate has voted to strip Earth of any sovereignty. They think they've won. Vaughn's expression hardened. Then it's time to remind them what humans do when backed into a corner. Clark nodded. Proceed as planned. Strike their fleet first. Disable, not destroy. We will give them one chance to surrender. If they refuse. He let the words hang, but Vaughn understood the meaning well. "Understood, sir. The fleet will move on your command." The transmission ended, and Vaughn turned to his officers. His voice carried the weight of history itself. "Begin the operation. Deploy the Ghost Strike teams to disable their capital ships. Make sure they never see us coming." Across the vastness of space, small, nearly invisible ships detached from the main fleet, slipping into enemy-controlled zones without a trace. These were humanity's Ghost Strike teams, elite infiltration units designed for silent takedowns. Their mission was clear: board the Xylary's largest warships, disable their command centers, and leave them powerless before the real attack began. On Xylary Prime, High Warlord Jekthar lounged on his throne, the faint flicker of amusement still dancing in his reptilian eyes. Reports of human retreat had filled his chambers for days now, each one more satisfying than the last. "Bring me more wine," he barked, his voice echoing through the grand hall. Servants scrambled to obey. But then the alarms began. A deep, warbling siren filled the air, causing the entire hall to freeze. The towering display screens flickered to life, showing incoming emergency transmissions. Confusion rippled through the warlords as their communications officers scrambled to make sense of the sudden disturbance. One of Jekthar's commanders rushed forward, his expression a mix of fear and disbelief. "My lord, our fleets, they are going dark." Jekthar narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean, going dark?" The commander swallowed hard. "Our capital warships, flagships of the Empire, have stopped transmitting. Entire battle groups have gone silent. No distress calls, no sensor readings. It's as if they've vanished." A heavy silence filled the room. Then another officer ran in, panting, his scales flushed with panic. "High Warlord, our orbital defenses are shutting down. The main defense grid is unresponsive." Jekthar's clawed hands clenched the armrests of his throne. Impossible. No force in the galaxy could do this without being seen. But as the Xylary scrambled in confusion, the truth became horrifyingly clear. Humanity had never been weak. They had never surrendered. They had only waited. And now, the storm was upon them. High Warlord Jekthar stood frozen as the alarms blared throughout the Grand War Hall. His warlords shouted over one another, scrambling for answers. How was this happening? Who was responsible? Their empire-spanning fleet had been their ultimate show of power, and now, in the span of moments, it was gone. "Re-establish communications with our warships," Jekthar roared, his deep voice shaking the chamber. A trembling officer at the communications station worked frantically. We can't, High Warlord. The signals are blocked. It's like something is jamming our entire network." Another warlord slammed his fist against the table. "Who could do this? What force in the galaxy has this kind of power?" Silence filled the room as a horrifying realization dawned on them all. "Humans," Jekthar growled, his sharp teeth grinding together. "This is their doing. We have underestimated them." Before anyone could respond, the great display screen in the war hall flickered. A deep blue glow filled the chamber as a transmission forced its way through their encrypted channels. And then a human appeared. Admiral Vaughn. The Xylary warlords gasped, their scaled faces twisting in shock. Vaughn stood tall in his immaculate fleet uniform, his expression unreadable. Behind him, the dim lighting of the UES Retribution's bridge cast eerie shadows over his face. The humans were supposed to be scattered, broken, defeated, yet here he was, calm, composed, and very much in control. "High Warlord Jekthar," Vaughn said, his voice carrying the weight of impending doom. "Your fleet is disabled. Your defenses are down. Your empire is no longer untouchable." Jekthar's claws dug into the stone table. "You dare. You believed humanity was weak," Vaughn interrupted, his voice cold and steady. "You mocked us. You invaded our space, slaughtered our people, and thought we would cower. But humanity does not break. We do not kneel. We adapt." Jekthar snarled. Your ships may have caught us off guard, but we are the Xilari Empire. We have ruled for centuries. Our forces are endless. Vaughn's expression didn't change. Instead, he merely stepped aside, revealing the full tactical display of the battlefield behind him. The Xilari warlords gasped. Humanity's fleet stretched across the void like a monstrous tide. Thousands of warships loomed just beyond Xilari Prime's atmosphere, their weapon systems locked and ready. Dreadnoughts, carriers, and sleek, lethal cruisers, all in perfect formation. The Xilari's once mighty armada had been reduced to drifting, powerless hulks. You have one chance, Vaughn continued. Surrender, and we will spare your homeworld. Refuse. He let the words hang, the silence more terrifying than any threat. Jekthar bared his teeth, rage boiling inside him. The humans should not have been capable of this. He had laughed at their fleet, dismissed them as weak. And yet here they were, dictating terms to the greatest empire in the sector. His claws tapped against the table. His warlords looked at him in silent panic. They were warriors, conquerors, but they had no fleet, no defenses, no hope. Still, Jekthar would not bow. You think you have won. He spat. Even if you destroy us today, the galaxy will not forget. There are other empires, other forces greater than you. One day, humanity will fall. Vaughn's lips curled into a slight smile. Maybe. But that day is not today. With a sharp nod, Vaughn issued the final command. Outside Xilari Prime, the human fleet moved. The wrath of humanity had begun. The sky above Xilari Prime darkened as humanity's fleet descended. The massive warships blotted out the stars, their hulls shimmering with the glow of countless weapons charging in unison. The Xilari citizens looked up in horror, their once proud world now under the shadow of impending destruction. Inside the war hall, High Warlord Jekthar clenched his claws against the stone table, his mind racing. The humans had turned the tide in a way he never thought possible. His fleet, his empire's pride, was nothing more than a collection of lifeless husks floating in the void. A deep voice echoed through the chamber once more. Your answer, High Warlord. Admiral Vaughn's image remained on the display, his gaze unwavering. The human was not bluffing. Jekthar's warlords turned to him, their expressions desperate. Some still held on to their arrogance, believing that the Xilari could find a way to counterattack. Others looked at their leader with silent pleading, hoping he would find a way to survive. The High Warlord's chest heaved with rage. His empire had stood unchallenged for centuries, built upon the conquest of weaker species. And now, in a single day, everything was unraveling. You dare demand our surrender? Jekthar spat, his sharp teeth bared. You believe your fleet alone is enough to break us. Admiral Vaughn didn't flinch. Instead, he simply nodded to someone off-screen. And then, the first orbital strike fell. A colossal blast erupted from the heavens, striking a remote Xilari military base. The explosion was visible from miles away, a massive plume of fire and smoke rising into the sky. Within seconds, the humans had demonstrated their intent. They were not here to negotiate. They were here to end the Xilari's reign. Jekthar's warlords gasped. You? One of them started, but Vaughn's voice cut through the room. This is just a warning shot, the admiral said coldly. The next targets will be your war factories, your shipyards, and your command centers. After that, your cities. Jekthar's heart pounded. This was impossible. The Xilari had crushed dozens of civilizations, had ruled through fear and overwhelming force. And yet now, it was they who stood on the brink of annihilation. The warlords shouted over one another. We must retaliate. One roared. With what? Another snapped. Our fleet is disabled. Our planetary defenses won't hold against that. He pointed at the screen, where humanity's warships loomed like a cosmic storm waiting to strike. Jekthar slammed his fist onto the table. Enough. The chamber fell silent. His mind was a battlefield of fury and despair. To surrender was unthinkable, but to resist was suicide. His empire, his people, he had led them to this moment, this humiliation. A new transmission came through. This time, it was not from Vaughn. It was from one of the Xilari planetary generals stationed in the northern capital. His voice trembled. "High Warlord, our planetary shields are failing. We cannot stop them. If you do not surrender, the humans will destroy us all." Jekthar's claws trembled. He was the warlord of the greatest empire in the sector. And yet in this moment, he had never felt so powerless. He turned back to Vaughn, his voice like shattered glass. "And if we surrender?" Vaughn's eyes locked onto his. "Your empire falls. Your people live." Jekthar felt his pride shatter like fragile stone. But he knew there was no choice left. With a heavy breath, he gave the order that would be remembered for generations. Xilari Prime surrenders. The words felt like poison on Jekthar's tongue. Xilari Prime surrenders. The warlords around him stood frozen, their faces a mix of disbelief, fury, and despair. For centuries, the Xilari had ruled through strength, conquest, and fear. To surrender, to bow before another species, was an unthinkable disgrace. Admiral Vaughn's expression remained unreadable as he processed the words. His voice came through the transmission, steady and commanding. "Transmit your surrender to all Xilari forces. Command your remaining ships to stand down. Any act of defiance will be met with destruction." Jekthar's claws dug into the stone table. His empire had once been mighty. Now it was at the mercy of a species they had ridiculed. "Do it," he growled to his comms officer. The officer hesitated, his fingers trembling over the controls. "I said do it." A signal was sent across all Xilari-controlled space. The message was simple. The war is over. The Xilari Empire surrenders. Silence filled the war chamber as the weight of those words sank in. Some warlords slumped in their seats, accepting their fate. Others stood trembling with rage, their pride too great to accept this reality. One warlord, a hulking brute named Vorkel, bared his teeth. "This is a mistake. We should fight to the last." Jekthar glared at him. "And die like fools." "No, the humans have won." Vorkel snarled, but before he could argue, the comms officer spoke, his voice shaken. "Sir, human ships are entering orbit." All eyes turned to the display. Above Xilari Prime, humanity's fleet loomed like an unbreakable wall. Their warships moved into precise formations, surrounding the planet completely. But no more weapons fired, no orbital bombardment, no demands for blood. Instead, a new transmission came through. "This is Admiral Vaughn of the Terran Defense Fleet." The voice boomed across all Xilari networks. "The war is over. Your empire has fallen. But your people will not be exterminated. Your rulers will face judgment for their crimes. Your soldiers will lay down their arms. Any who resist will face the full might of humanity." Across Xilari space, panic and chaos erupted. Entire fleets stood down, their captains unwilling to face the human fleet. Soldiers abandoned their posts, knowing resistance was futile. The once feared empire was crumbling. On Xilari Prime, Jekthar's warlords erupted into arguments. Some demanded they resist, that they fight to the bitter end. Others saw reason and urged surrender. The High Warlord silenced them all with a single roar. "Enough." His voice shook the war hall. He turned back to Vaughn. "And what will become of us?" For the first time, Vaughn's expression softened, just slightly. "You will be held accountable for the crimes of your empire. The innocent will not be punished for the sins of their rulers. But your days of conquest are over." Jekthar exhaled slowly. His empire was gone. But his people would live. The surrender was finalized within the hour. Human ships landed across Xilari Prime, securing key locations without bloodshed. The warlords were taken into custody, their power stripped away. Silari citizens, once filled with arrogance, now looked at the humans with a mix of fear and awe. As Jekthar stood on the balcony of his palace, watching human soldiers take control, he spoke to Vaughn one last time. "I underestimated your kind." Vaughn nodded. "Many have." The war was over. The Exilari Empire was no more. And in its place, a new era had begun, one where humanity was no longer mocked or dismissed. They had proven their strength, and the galaxy would never forget.